the weight of roses. Have you ever received something beautiful and felt afraid? Not because the thing itself was dangerous, but because you didn't know where it came from, and your heart already suspected the answer was somewhere you didn't want to look? Well, hold that feeling, because this story begins exactly there. Chapter 1. The Roses. The roses came on a Tuesday, 12 red roses tied with a black ribbon, no card. Elena Vasquez stood at the door of their small apartment on Crescent Lane, looking at the flowers carefully. She felt something was wrong. She didn't know why, but she did. She put them in a vase anyway. When her husband came home that evening, smelling of oil and hard work, she showed him. She watched his face. Marco Vasquez was not a man who worried easily. He had a kind face and rough hands from working at Hargrove Industries, where he was a floor supervisor. He looked at the roses and frowned. "Who sent them?" "There's no card." They looked at each other across the kitchen table. Then Marco said it was probably a mistake. Flowers meant for someone else. Elena nodded, but she moved the vase to the window where she could see it, like watching a strange dog that hasn't moved yet. That night, neither of them slept well, but neither said so in the morning. Have you ever met someone who smiles at you, speaks kindly to you, shakes your hand, and yet something deep inside you says, "This person does not see you as a person at all"? That feeling has a name. It just takes time to learn it. Chapter 2. The Surgeon. His boss's name was Dorian Hargrove. He was 45 years old, always perfectly dressed, with silver hair at his temples that he wore like a prize. He drove a different expensive car every week, a dark Bentley on Monday, a white Porsche by Friday, as if cars were something you changed like a shirt. His office sat on the top floor of the building, and from behind its tall glass walls, he looked down at workers like Marco, the way a bird looks at something small and slow in a field below. Marco had worked for him for 3 years. In those 3 years, Dorian had never given him a raise. He spoke to Marco like a man who expected to be disappointed. "Vasquez, let's try to do this correctly this time," he would say, holding a report Marco had already fixed twice, turning it over in his hands like it was something barely worth touching. The other workers called Dorian the surgeon behind his back, because he hurt people cleanly and felt nothing after. Marco stayed quiet and worked hard. He had to. Elena's mother was sick in Tucson, and the bills were growing every month. He kept his head down and carried his pride carefully, like something that could break if he wasn't gentle with it. He told himself, "This is temporary. Things will change." He had been telling himself this for 3 years. Have you ever opened your front door and felt the world shift slightly under your feet? Not because of what you saw, but because of what it meant. Some things arrive looking innocent. A box, a ribbon, a gift with no name on it. And the question isn't what it is. The question is, who sent it, and why don't they want you to know? Chapter 3. The Bracelet. The second gift came 3 weeks later, a gold bracelet with a small diamond clasp, in a velvet box, dark blue, sitting perfectly still on the front step of their building as if it had always belonged there. Again, no card, no name, nothing. Elena did not put it on. She stood over it the way you stand over something you don't want to touch. Then she called Marco at work, her voice calm and flat in the way a voice gets when a person is working very hard to stay calm. He left the floor early, something he had never done before in 3 years, and drove home with his hands tight on the wheel. He found her sitting at the kitchen table, the velvet box open in front of her, the bracelet inside catching the afternoon light. She wasn't looking at it the way a woman looks at jewelry. She was looking at it the way a detective looks at evidence. "I'm going to find out," Marco said. Elena looked up at him. Her voice was quiet but firm, the way it got when she had already thought something through completely. "Don't do anything at work," she said. "Not yet." Marco sat down across from her. They looked at each other over the open box, and in the silence between them, something was agreed upon, something serious and careful and patient. But patience, they were about to learn, has its limits. Have you ever been invited somewhere and known, deep in your bones, before you even walked through the door, that the invitation was not really for you, that you were being used as a reason, a cover, a vehicle to get to someone else? And have you ever gone anyway because you needed to see it with your own eyes before you could believe it? That is exactly what Marco and Elena did, and what they saw that night changed everything. Chapter 4. The Party. Every October, Dorian Hargrove held a large party at his home, Fernwood Estate, a property so large it had its own name, its own driveway half a mile long, its own darkness at the edges where the lights didn't reach. He invited important clients, business people, politicians, and always the floor supervisors from his company. Going was called optional. Everyone knew what that meant. Marco had gone twice before, alone, standing at the edge of rooms that were too large and conversations that cost more money than he made in a month. This year, the invitation came directly to their apartment. Heavy cardstock, printed carefully, Mr. and Mrs. Marco Vasquez. Elena read it twice. She set it down on the table. "He has never invited wives before," Marco said. "No," she agreed. "He hasn't." They looked at each other. They did not say what they were both thinking. They went anyway, because sometimes you have to walk toward the thing that frightens you just to confirm it is real. Fernwood Estate in October was beautiful, the way something dangerous can be beautiful. String lights filled the oak trees along the driveway. Inside, the house was full of warm light and cold money. Marble floors, a jazz band playing softly in another room, waiters in white gloves carrying champagne like an offering at church. Elena wore her blue dress, bought on sale 2 years ago, and she wore it with such ease and confidence that it might as well have cost $1,000. Dorian Hargrove found them in 8 minutes. He came across the room with the slow certainty of a man who never has to hurry, because the world always waits for him. He shook Marco's hand briefly, barely looking at him, and then he turned to Elena. Something moved in his face. Small, controlled, like a door opening just a little. "Mrs. Vasquez," he took her hand. "I have heard so much about you." "From whom?" she asked pleasantly, her eyes steady and clear. He paused, just half a second too long. "Your husband speaks of you often." Marco had never spoken about his wife at work. Not once. He stood beside Elena and felt something cold and clarifying move through him, like ice water reaching his chest. For the next 2 hours, Dorian stayed close to them. He showed them paintings worth more than their apartment building. He talked about his summer in Italy, his winter in Switzerland. He walked them through his private library, a long room with 20-foot shelves and the smell of old leather, and pointed out books he owned the way a man points out trophies. He spoke to Marco just enough to seem polite, but his eyes, his attention, his warmth, the full light of him were always, entirely, on Elena. "This estate has been in my family since 1932, he said, standing at a tall window, the garden glowing gold below them. "But it has always felt like something was missing. The right presence. You know what I mean." He was not looking at the garden. Elena turned to Marco and said she needed a glass of water. She walked away and did not return for 20 minutes. In the car going home, they were quiet for a long time. The city moved past the windows. Neither of them spoke. Then Elena said, "It's him." Marco's hands stayed still on the wheel. "I know. The roses, the bracelet, all of it. I know." She looked at his face in the dark, at his jaw, at his eyes fixed on the road, at the way he was holding something tightly inside himself. "What are you going to do?" she asked. The road stretched ahead of them, long and straight. "The right thing," he said. And this time, when he said it, it didn't sound like patience. It sounded like a decision that had already been made. Have you ever watched a quiet person finally decide they have had enough? Not an angry decision, not loud, not rushed. A calm one, the kind that comes after someone has thought everything through, counted every cost, and chosen anyway. Those are the decisions that actually change things. Marco was about to make one of those decisions, and Dorian Hargrove had no idea it was coming. Chapter 5. The Right Thing. Marco spent 2 weeks writing everything down. He was careful and patient, the same way he worked on the factory floor, the same steady hands and quiet focus. He wrote every date. He photographed the bracelet still in its velvet box, untouched. He listed the party, the things Dorian had said, the way it was all connected. Then he called Priya. Priya was a lawyer, an old college friend, small and sharp and direct, the kind of person who tells you the truth before you finish asking the question. She listened to everything Marco said without interrupting. Then she was quiet for a moment. "You have something real here," she said. "The gifts sent to your home, the way he used his position as your boss, the party, the pattern of it." "But he never said anything directly," Marco said. "He was always careful." "That's how men like him work," Priya said. "But careful is not the same as clean. You can see the shape of what he was doing, even if he never said it out loud." She told him what to file and where. She helped him write it correctly, not too emotional, not too thin. Just facts, dates, and evidence laid out in order. One copy went to the state labor office. One copy went to the company's HR department. One copy went to a journalist, a friend of Elena's from university, sealed in an envelope, with instructions to open it only if nothing happened. Marco signed everything on a Thursday afternoon. Then he drove to the office, walked up to HR, and handed in his resignation letter. He did both things on the same day, because he had learned from 3 years of watching Dorian Hargrove that power only respects people who are willing to walk away from it. Have you ever had to leave a place you worked hard to build, not because you failed, but because staying would have cost you something more important than a job? Have you ever packed up not in defeat, but in dignity? Marco and Elena were about to do exactly that. And what waited for them on the other side of the road was something neither of them had fully let themselves believe in yet. Chapter 6. The Road to Phoenix. He had applied for the new job 2 months before the party. Quietly, late at night, while Elena was sleeping, some part of him already knowing how the story would end even before it did. The position was at a smaller company in Phoenix. Less money at first, but a real title, a real path, a place where a man would be measured by his work and nothing else. He had accepted the offer on a Thursday evening. He told Elena that night at the kitchen table. She sat across from him, holding her cup of tea in both hands, looking at him for a long moment. A moment long enough to hold everything they had been through. The roses, the bracelet, the party, the long, quiet drive home, all of it. Then she said, "I already started packing the kitchen." He laughed, a real laugh, deep and full and surprised, the kind that comes from somewhere genuine. He reached across the table and took her hand. She squeezed back. Outside, the city made its ordinary sounds. Inside, something felt clean for the first time in months. They left Crescent Lane on a bright Saturday in November. The roses had been dead and thrown away for weeks. The bracelet was with Priya, kept as evidence. The apartment where they had lived for 4 years grew smaller in the rearview mirror. then smaller still. And then the city folded away behind them, and the highway opened wide and long and full of nothing but direction. Elena had her feet on the dashboard, and the window cracked open, letting the cool air move through her hair. Marco drove with one hand on the wheel and held her hand with the other. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Somewhere east of the city, Elena reached into the back seat without looking and pulled out an old paper road map, the kind that unfolds too big and never folds correctly again. She opened it to Arizona and put her finger on a thin blue line cutting through empty space. "This is us," she said. Marco glanced over and smiled. "Long way to go." "Yes," she said, and she was smiling too, her face in the window light looking forward. "Good." Epilogue. The Labor Office finished its investigation 14 months later. Dorian Hargrove paid a sum of money to end the case quietly, the way powerful men pay to make things disappear. He stayed at his company 6 more months after that, and then resigned without announcement, without noise, without ceremony, the way a man leaves a room that has already decided he doesn't belong in it. Marco Vasquez became operations director at his new company within 2 years. He was respected there. The men on his floor liked working for him because he never made anyone feel small. Elena planted roses in the garden of their house in Phoenix, yellow ones. Her choice. Every spring without fail, they grew. And if you ever find yourself standing at your own door, holding something that arrived without a name on it, feeling that quiet fear in your chest, trust it. The heart knows things before the mind is ready to say them out loud. That is not weakness, that is wisdom. The end.